Welcome, Motenta people. The world saw Charlton Heston as being larger than life. Nobody could dream of a life more fulfilled than his. No one could have contributed more to his country, profession, and family. He himself said, "I have lived such a lovely life. I have lived enough for two people." Let's take a look at this wonderful life. Why Charlton Heston attacked his film director? Make sure to watch the video until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you are new here, join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Motenta's channel. Charlton Heston was renowned for his chiseled jaw, broad shoulders, and resonant voice. And yes, how can we forget about the outstanding roles he performed? Charlton Heston, one of Hollywood's greatest leading men, was tall, well-built, and ruggedly handsome. He was known for playing a long list of historical figures, particularly in biblical epics. Over the course of 60 years, he made 100 cinematic roles as a Hollywood icon. Though Heston began his career on stage and went on to produce some of the most iconic films ever made, he is not just known for his film career. In fact, Charlton Heston is the actor who remained active in politics and courted controversy the most. So how did he undergo a transition from imposing hero to a controversial political figure, and what was his path like? Let's look back and watch. Heston was never an attention-seeking child. He was born in Wilmette, Illinois, as John Charles Carter in 1923. When his family moved to St. Helens, Michigan, while he was a young boy, he was happiest while exploring the woods and lakes there. Then unexpectedly, his life changed. Soon after Heston turned 10, his parents split up. A few years later, his mother was remarried to Chad Heston and returned to Wilmette with her kids. The kids eventually took on their stepfather's last name, but young Heston missed his old life and didn't fit in with his new high school. That is until he discovered his interest in acting, which would become his lifelong passion. Heston had already developed a love for acting, and thanks to his brilliance, Northwestern University offered him a partial scholarship to study drama. He spent 2 years there and met Lydia Clark, who was also a theater student during that period. Heston knew that this was the lady he wanted to spend his entire life with. She would not, though, make things simple for him. Throughout the years they attended school together, he repeatedly proposed to Lydia, but she consistently turned him down. Heston had to finally get ready to go after 2 years. When World War II began, Heston volunteered in the U.S. Air Force, which inspired him to give Lydia one final chance. But guess what? She finally said yes. He was surprised and happy beyond words, and they were married in a church in North Carolina before he reported for active duty in March 1944. After he got home, their life together would really begin. Heston traveled to New York with Lydia to try their luck as actors on stage after serving in the Air Force for 2 years as a radio operator and aerial gunner. They spent some time working as models for painters before heading to North Carolina to try running their own playhouse for a whole year. They didn't stay there very long, though, as Heston had other targets in mind. After living in North Carolina for a year, the couple returned to New York in 1948 because Heston's big priority was to land a job on Broadway. But this time, he had a hidden weapon. Around this time, he adopted a new stage name by combining his stepfather's last name, Heston, and his mother's maiden name, Charlton. Maybe it was his name, or just call it his luck this time. Broadway welcomed him with open arms. When Heston arrived back in New York, things were unquestionably getting better for him. He portrayed Proculius in the Broadway production of Antony and Cleopatra, and as a result, CBS offered him a part in their production of Julius Caesar. After that, he had a number of more TV roles, one of which caught the attention of director Hal Wallis of Casablanca fame. Heston had no idea that Wallis was about to drastically change his life. Heston couldn't resist accepting Wallis's offer to star in his upcoming picture, Dark City, even though he had intended to concentrate on his stage and television careers. He said, "Well, maybe only for one film to see what it's like," when Lydia reminded him of his objective. Although Dark City didn't perform well at the box office, Heston's performance was praised by critics. Heston had already achieved iconic status on the big screen at this point, thanks to his roles. He was the epitome of masculinity, standing 6 feet 3 inches tall and frequently baring his chest in his roles. His big break came when Cecil B. DeMille noticed him and he cast him first as the circus manager in his 1952 film, The Greatest Show on Earth, which won an Academy Award for Best Film. Then DeMille cast Heston as Moses in the 1956 epic The Ten Commandments, after noticing similarities between the young actor and Michelangelo's sculpture of the legendary figure. Heston rigorously prepared for the part by studying Old Testament verses. He was also prepared to risk spilling his own blood. He made the decision to play the part barefoot in order to give it more authenticity. Braving Mount Sinai's spiky rocks was kind of a price to pay for fame. 3 decades later, Vincent Canby, a critic for the New York Times, remarked that Heston's portrayal of Moses had more than a hint of the rough American frontiersman of myth. Between his 2 DeMille hits, Heston had roles in a number of westerns and adventure movies. And after his legendary performance as the Hebrew prophet, he returned to something like this. He collaborated with Orson Welles on the thriller Touch of Evil, which wasn't a big hit when it was released, but has now become a timeless classic. After Welles and DeMille, Heston had the opportunity to collaborate with William Wyler, another well-known film director. Ben-Hur, a 1959 classic film directed by William Wyler about a prince of ancient Judea who fights against the Roman Empire, solidified Heston's reputation and made him one of Hollywood's highest-paid actors. Heston spent weeks mastering the chariot drive for the iconic race scene, reflecting a dedication to the roles he played that was apparent throughout his career. Hard work paid off, and 11 Academy Awards were earned by Ben-Hur, including Best Actor for Charlton Heston. But for Heston, operating a chariot was never going to be enough. He had developed an interest in the larger challenges of his time as a result of his active, adventurous, and uncertain life. Of course, politics was one of those interests. Heston's political commitment shifted multiple times over his life. He is reported to have contributed to Adlai Stevenson's unsuccessful bid for the presidency in 1956 as his first political effort. The closest living person to a Charlton Heston role was President Eisenhower, yet the actor actively campaigned to have the general removed from his position. His opposition to the anti-communist witch hunt started by Republican Senator Joe McCarthy served as one of his driving forces. Heston supported John F. Kennedy for president 4 years later, giving him at least the satisfaction of being on the winning side. Everyone was aware of Heston's constant support for what he believed to be right. When many Hollywood celebrities were turning a blind eye to civil rights issues, this man stood up for them. He participated in the 1963 Washington Civil Rights March and stood next to Martin Luther King Jr. on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. He referred to King as a modern-day Moses. He served as the Screen Actors Guild's president from 1966 to 1971, following in Ronald Reagan's footsteps. He went out to entertain the GIs in Vietnam despite being against the war. Richard Nixon, in his opinion, was terrible for the United States. But when Heston's 50th birthday came closer, his movie career went through a shift that was swiftly followed by a change in his politics. He was forced to settle for supporting roles once his major role opportunities dried up. And when he played Cardinal Richelieu in The Three Musketeers, he even played a villain for the first time. The Colbys, a Dynasty spinoff, was also there. He also saw his pal Ronald Reagan's political career in the Republican Party from a distance. He eventually accepted Reagan's offer to serve as co-chairman of the President's Task Committee on the Arts and Humanities in 1981. Heston was once an unwavering Democrat, but his views appeared to completely shift in later life. Heston registered as a Republican in 1987, despite the fact that he also reportedly voted for Republican President Richard Nixon in 1972. He said that the Democrats had changed, not him, and that he had discovered nothing noteworthy about the transition. It was also obvious that, at least in Heston's perspective, the very fact that he had dedicated his life to bringing great figures like Moses or Ben-Hur, or geniuses like Michelangelo to the big screen, gave him political authority. However, we'd beg to differ when you consider his contradictory viewpoints. Here's something that many people are unaware of. Heston was one of the first A-listers to publicly support and advocate gun control laws when he spoke out in favor of the Gun Control Act of 1968. But as time went on, he changed his mind completely and emerged as one of the nation's leading supporters of gun ownership, and also a huge supporter of the NRA. The way Heston remained critical about his political choices, he strived to be ideal in his personal life as well. Fairy tale endings are surprising in Hollywood. Heston and Lydia were not one of the many couples whose marriages ended in disaster. Heston's daughter acknowledges that dealing with his devoted female fans was difficult for her mother. But despite these challenges, the couple upheld their vows and remained together through good times and bad. The Hestons both battled cancer. Heston battled prostate cancer, while Lydia Clark fought breast cancer. Thankfully, they both received therapy at the right time and were successful in defeating the ailment. Unfortunately, Heston would face other challenges as well. He confessed that he had gotten help for his alcoholism. He acknowledged that he wasn't drunk to the point where he was blundering or slurring his words, but he immediately realized that he had developed a drinking addiction and he wanted to address it before it worsened. Was this memorable statement at the NRA conference driven by his dependency on the drink? Heston was chosen to serve as the National Rifle Association's chairman for the first time in 1997. In 2001, he was chosen for an unprecedented fourth term. Heston spoke at the annual NRA convention prior to disclosing that he had entered rehab. He famously raised a rifle above his head and proclaimed that Al Gore, who was running for president at the time, would have to come and take it from his cold, dead hands. At his house, he had a personal collection of 30 of these items. That speech would come to dominate Heston's life for the rest of it, something he couldn't have known at the time. When Michael Moore was making Bowling for Columbine, he visited Heston to interview him and found out that he still firmly believed in the Second Amendment in light of the damage that a gunman had caused to a school. It went so badly, Heston acknowledged that he was and said that due to mixed ethnicity or background, such events may be more frequent in the U.S. Before the interview was over, he excused himself and left. This interview with Moore drew criticism from some who saw it as an attack, but it wasn't the only factor. Heston revealed he had Alzheimer's shortly after Moore conducted his interview. He revealed it via a message that was recorded. Many people believed Moore should have cut the interview short when Bowling for Columbine was released in 2002 because of Heston's mental state at the time. Heston didn't have many friends in the entertainment industry, but he did have a strong relationship with one person, Kirk Douglas, and thus the men were able to put aside their political differences and get along despite having quite different views. Moore's decision to include the interview in his movie enraged Douglas, who said he would never be able to forgive Moore. Heston made some prominent enemies despite having some supporters on his side. Nevertheless, he was open about having zero chemistry with Sophia Loren, or that he believed she was too obsessed with her looks. He also didn't care for Ava Gardner, who was drunk for the entire time they were on set together. But he had a special issue with one guy in particular. With one exception, Heston always got along with his directors. He became enraged when Sam Peckinpaw, who directed him in Major Dundee, rewrote several things and yelled at Heston for not keeping up with the changes. Heston responded in a bizarre way. The actor had a change of heart and pulled out his saber before urging his steed and rushing towards Peckinpaw. Who knows what would have resulted if the director hadn't moved swiftly to the side. Needless to say, there was no rekindling of their relationship after that. After Heston revealed he had Alzheimer's disease, his health started to rapidly decline. According to family and pals, he eventually lost the ability to even get out of bed. But he continued to live for another 6 years. He died of pneumonia in April 2008 at the age of 84. He had his wife and kids by his side. There is no disputing that his demise marked the end of an era, despite the fact that many people did not share his ideas or the causes he supported. Heston's passing was decried by many. Tributes came from George W. Bush, Nancy Reagan, and many others. George W. Bush had also bestowed Heston with the Presidential Medal of Freedom during what would end up being his ultimate public appearance. His funeral was attended by nearly 250 people, including numerous A-list celebrities. Ceremonially, he was given numerous honors, including election to the Hall of Great Western Performers at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, and election as the Illinois Lincoln Academy Laureate, where he was given the Order of Lincoln, the state's highest honor. There was no denying that Charlton Heston was one of the most influential and prolific actors of 20th century cinema, providing generations of audiences with some of the most memorable big-screen performances of all time. But the way he caught the attention because of his political activism gives us a reason to remember him from a different perspective. How do you see Charlton Heston? Let us know in the comments section below. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Women were obsessed with Charlton just as with Clint Eastwood. Why Clint Eastwood never stopped making children? Let's find out from this video.